Hey, welcome everyone. My name is Christian Felowulski, and I look after the Space Startup Program at Stone & Chalk. Stone & Chalk is leading startup support program with hubs in Sydney, Melbourne, and Adelaide. Stone & Chalk Space is based in Adelaide at Lot 14, the country of the Kaurna people, and we acknowledge their elders, past and present, as we acknowledge all owners, traditional owners of land in Australia. We welcome you all to this event with Bill Bartee and Enrico Palermo. We're very proud to have been able to secure these two important speakers on this event, where we want to explore how venture capital and entrepreneurship can power the next decade of Australia's space industry development. We have almost 500 signups for this event. We have registrations from all major cities in Australia, but also regional and rural places like far north Queensland or Tasmania. We also have about 20% of signups from overseas. I've seen signups from Japan, Singapore, India, New Zealand, US, and a couple of countries in Europe, such as Luxembourg and Germany. About 30% are founders, 15% of signups are from government and corporates each, and about 20% are investors. We have VCs, bankers, and angel investors who want to learn about the space tech investment opportunity. We are aware that many of you are currently in some kind of lockdown across Australia. We feel with you, and we hope that interesting events like this keep you going and give you some inspiration. At this point, I'd like to thank our partners in producing this event, the Andy Thomas Space Foundation, which is named after Australia's astronaut, Andy Thomas. They engaged in a number of STEM and education initiatives and also organized the Australian Space Forum, the 12th edition of which takes place tomorrow here in Adelaide. We also thank Microsoft, who recently announced a suite of products for the space industry, and encourage you to check that out. I'm now handing over to our own Michelle Price, co-CEO of Stone & Chalk, who will be giving you more context about this event and introduce the speakers, Bill and Enrico. So without further ado, handing over to you.
Well, fantastic. Thank you, Christian. And thanks to the Adelaide team for putting this event together. Hello, everyone, no matter where you're dialing in from. It's great to have you as part of this fantastic event. And I too would like to, in the spirit of reconciliation, acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, sea, culture and cyberspace. I pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging, and of course all First Nations people who might be with us today as part of this awesome event. Stone & Chalk Group, as Christian mentioned, we came together as a group. AusCyber and Stone & Chalk merged together at the beginning of this year. Our programs support commercial outcomes for startups and scale-ups across emerging tech. And our ambition in Adelaide is to further support the space industry, including in particular the startups, but for all Australia. What an exciting industry to be part of. Why are we doing this event? In addition to what Christian mentioned in terms of what's happening in the space industry this week in Australia, with you, our audience, and of course, our really awesome guest speakers, we want to explore what it takes to power the next generation of space entrepreneurs and why venture capital should and needs to play an important role as part of this. Venture capital for space tech, like all others areas of space and deep tech, are only just starting to grab the attention of venture capital in Australia. And there's so much to offer. We all probably have some sense of what that's, but it's about diving into that today. Deep tech, of course, does require the right mix of patient and hot capital, as I refer to it as, to be provided by investors at the right time who understand the trade-offs, the risks, but also the rewards. Because of course, the lead time for some of the technologies and services that get wrapped around them to come to market and be able to get cut through can be a lot longer than all other forms of technology. So we see that, of course, in areas like space, but also things like cybersecurity and in defence industry, we're not only contending with what we know to be the technology readiness levels, we also have to contend with increasingly what's referred to as the integration readiness level, or IRL, and increasingly the relatively new kid on the block in this regard, the systems readiness level, or SRL. So between TRL, IRL, and SRL, sounds all very jargonistic, But the integration and convergence of those three concepts actually comes together almost no other in areas like space tech. It's really important that we understand these concepts as we look at the marriage between entrepreneurship and forms of capital. For space startups, this is often a little bit trickier, of course, because we see that there's really no error for in-orbit mistakes. Now, this is a concept that does not impact any other industry. Those space curious amongst us would have seen the reactions of speculative investors around the mistakes of both Boeing and Virgin Galactic, but of course, most famously of SpaceX, and what interest that attracts. So our guests in this conversation on venture capital for space will also speak to the expectation management around how we take great space technology to market. And this is, of course, from a founder perspective, as well as an investor perspective. Venture capital, of course, seeks out the best opportunities when it comes to investment globally, but also at home in Australia. And we've got so many things happening here in Australia, in particular within the home of space now in South Australia, that it's really worth paying attention to. And this in part, of course, is why Stone and Chalk Group is shining a very harsh but exciting spotlight into this space. So the surge of interest is real, and it's for good reason. To unpack all of this, and I might say at warp speed, given how much there is to get across, it gives me great pleasure to be able to introduce you to our speakers today. If you're all about space, then you will know who Enrico Palermo is. At the moment, of course, he is the head of Australia's space agency, the first of its kind in Australian history. Having gone to school in Perth, he traversed the globe trying to find what would pique his interest around the convergence of his skill set in engineering with the emerging space industry globally. He found that home in Virgin Galactic. Now, he was there in the very early days. In fact, he was one of the first 10 employees. 14 years later, having moved on from that organization to come back home and head our space agency. Of course, we know that 14 years of history in the journey of Virgin Galactic gives him such a special insight into what's been going on around the world. I encourage you to look up Enrico's full bio on the Space Agency's website, and a hot tip for all of those founders out there, what a way to write a bio. That's a really hot tip there. Now, of course, if you're all about investment, then you'd know who Bill Bartee is, and Bill is a great friend of mine as well. He's currently managing partner at Main Sequence, the CSIRO's main investment arm, which Bill co-founded, importantly, in an extraordinary move by Prime Minister Turnbull a number of years ago to try and attract more venture capital into disruptive technologies. And what an amazing role Main Sequence has had in that. Now, of course, famously before Main Sequence, Bill was also a co-founder of Blackbird Ventures, one of Australia's most famous private venture capital firms that really do enjoy investing in sovereign capability. So there's so much to get through, everyone. Let's jump in and hear what Enrico and Bill have to say. Over to you guys.
Well, thanks, Michelle. Hi, Enrico. How are you?
Hey, good to see you, Bill. Thanks, Michelle.
Yeah. Look, first want to say thanks to the audience for joining us. Hopefully we'll say a couple of things that might be interesting and spark some discussion. Also would love to thank Christian and Michelle and Stone and Chalk for putting this event on, because it's a huge logistics nightmare in the background, and they've done a wonderful job pulling it all together. But let's just jump into it right away. So Enrico, one of the things I've been curious about is how did this all come about? Because where you're sitting over there in Mojave drinking a mojito, a call from a headhunter one day that says, hey, look, the longitudinally lucky country wants head of a space agency, and now you got the best job in the world. How did this all come about for you? How did you get here?
Yeah, I'm very fortunate, as Michelle said, and thank you to the organizers as well, to have been on the Galactic program a good 14 years. And really the moment that sparked my attention, I think, was that moment all of Australia had, at least the space community, when it was announced we were going to have a space agency here in Adelaide at IAC 2017. And I remember having goosebumps remotely when I heard that, and thought, this means Australia is going to put itself on the map. Having that agency, it's such a signal that Australia wants to be a player in space. And I think I watched and was very impressed what Dr. Clark and Anthony Murphy and the team did in the first 2 years. Really, we've had seed funding as an agency, and they've achieved a tremendous amount. And the opportunity to come over as we scale the ambitions was just pretty exciting, Bill, to be in this position.
Yeah, that sounds great. And you've had this, amazing career over at Virgin. And one of the things I'd love to understand a little better is what do you think are the kind of the big goals of the space agency in your mind? What do you hope to do in order to advance the next level of investment and growth in the entire space sector in Australia? What's the big plan, if you will?
Yeah, happy to talk to that. I'll state we've obviously, got our publicly stated goals. We're on a path to triple the size of the sector here in Australia, and importantly, grow a space sector that is thriving, globally respected. And so that's outlined well in our civil space strategy. But for me personally, this is about achieving outcomes for the nation. How do we use space technologies? How do we use space data to improve the lives of all Australians? And I think we have immense opportunities to do that. This week, you may have seen the announcement by CSIRO and Microsoft who are now leaning heavily into this sector to look at feral herds of cows around Australia to protect country. And that's an example of really what we can do with the power of space. I think a personal aspiration for me too is really for us as a nation to be proud as a space nation and really be that aspirational destination where space professionals want to work. I left Australia in 2005 because I wanted to pursue a career in human spaceflight and had to do that. And we've got such talent in this country. How do we curate those opportunities here henceforth?
Yeah, fantastic. I know that your time in Mojave, you worked with a very famous entrepreneur over there in Virgin Galactic. One of the things I know we want to discuss and want to start to get into is how the venture community and the space community can work together and what opportunities there are. But what did you find? How did you find agencies and private companies work together that was effective? Is there a playbook or is there some sort of system where each can feed off of each other and bring the best out in both? How does that private-public partnership work best, do you think?
Yeah, I think that model has played out really well in the US, and I think we can learn from it here as we think about how government may invest in this sector. So the US has had various programs, big scale, Commercial Crew obviously has played a big part in SpaceX getting to where it is today. But at a smaller level, programs like venture class launch services, flight opportunities, where government can be that early anchor customer for these smart, talented teams and give that sort of stamp of approval. And I think that's something we, the agency and government, can do more of here in Australia. I think we're obviously the regulator as well for space launches and returns. And what I learned in working with the FAA AST in the US is really that authentic dialogue that needs to happen between the operator and the regulator. And I think that's a journey we're on here in Australia. So I think we have a lot to learn from that. And that's been, I think, fundamental as you look at investing in space, the exponential growth we're seeing in investment in the US. So I think, there's some perspectives there.
Yeah, go ahead.
Now, I wanted to ask you a question, Bill, and there was an article with Martin Dersma for Main Sequence of Main Sequence being on a mission for space.
Yeah.
And that's, I know, terrific to many of our audience, many of our founders here that are listening in today. I think it'd be great to hear your thoughts on why space. Why is that the right investment, one of the investment theses of Main Sequence going forward?
Yeah, it's an area that we love, and we have certain what we call challenge areas in our fund, and this is an area that we think is one that is very impactful and has a lot of upside, a lot of growth. It so happens that Martin and I are of the age where we grew up under Apollo, so we got infected with the whole space movement, and which spawned an entire generation of engineers, and that sort of never leaves you. So I share your excitement here. I think for us, what we look for is we see things have changed in the whole space over time. If you look back at 10, 15 years ago, a software company used to cost $5-10 million just to start. And of course, over time with technology development, you can now start a software company for virtually nothing. And we see a lot of the same things happening in space. The cost to launch is going down. We hope it continues to go down. So we see this as a very kind of a rich area for us. And as Michelle said, what you have to do as an investor in this particular area is you have to recognize that there are a couple of things that are different from perhaps the normal investment things that venture firm might invest in. So there's longer cycles. Sometimes it costs more money. You have to be prepared to be patient and put up with things. There's not the sort of normal metrics that you can point to and readily understand whether progress is being made. With that in mind, we still believe that there's huge opportunity that's unlocked here. It's interesting to know that I found out not several years ago that CSIRO, for instance, is the largest operator of communications gear and a large NASA partner in the Southern Hemisphere. So there is a strong base for launching from, if you will. But what we see is we see launch opportunities, we see communications opportunities, we see all the support opportunities here. And it's having such a historic background and a large background. It's wonderful to see that there now is a space agency that can spearhead the effort here. So what we're doing is we've got investments in a number of different companies that people would know, and as do other venture firms. But look, we're supporters of Myriota and Q-Control and Advanced Navigation, Gilmore, and have been supporters of through Blackbird of Fleet and others. So there's a lot of companies that we're supporters of, and we're looking for more. What I think has to be done, though, is that it has to be recognized is that a number of these companies, while we're supporters of them, and we will continue to be, they're still early in their evolution. And if someone asks me, what are you looking for in an investment in and around space? Well, we're looking for something that contains all of the attributes that we would normally look for, but we also have to understand that eventually there has to be a business model where you can make money at this, because venture funds are not in the business of making donations. We like to make impact and make return for our investors so that we can plow more of it back into the space industry. So it's a very important sector for us in our venture fund, and one we'll continue to support.
That's terrific to hear. And I think you raise a couple of good points in there, Bill, particularly around really respecting the heritage we have as a nation. I think we sometimes describe ourselves too much as like an emerging space agency, space sector. We have an agency that's only 3 years old, but really we've got a tremendous amount of heritage to build on. And I think that's part of the story we need to tell more. I know the audience would have appreciated hearing that feedback. Do you think there's space for, no pun intended, for more venture firms like Main Sequence leaning into space in Australia?
Yeah, oh, for sure. I do. Look, there's enough opportunity. We can't do it all, of course. Now we have to be careful because we're fiduciaries of other people's capital. So we have to be careful about what we do. But the opportunities, we see are pretty vast. One of the things that interests us a lot is precision navigation and timing, for instance. We all know the GPS system that's in place now, and you can, if you think about it, there's been trillions of dollars of economic value created from GPS systems, whether it's Google Maps or timing or anything like that. There's lots and lots of things that has enabled. And we see that non-GPS sensors is an area, for instance, that has a lot of growth. There certainly are enough opportunities for more funds to be invested. And look, this sector takes capital. We can't do it all. We might invest in one particular company, and it takes a lot of serious, a number of rounds of capital for that company to be successful. And we don't have it all. So there certainly is room in the market for more deep tech and more investors like Main Sequence. And we would welcome that because it's great for us because we diversify our financial risk and we also get to learn from other people too. So yes, there's room. What about you? Where do you see the growth opportunities coming?
I mean, I think there's immense growth opportunities, and what I'd say is a signal. I think I've been in the role 7 months and spent a lot of time studying our civil space strategy, our target priority areas, and I truly believe we've picked the right areas for Australia as opportunities. And so I'm very bullish and boyish on what's happening. And one area in particular that we're starting to see deal flow around the world, and I think we'll see here soon, is related to the fact that the space is getting more contested. And I think what that does is provides a huge opportunity cost around which business plans can be built, because the impact of losing assets in space is just, it's unthinkable what that will cause for governments, but also private entities. And I think that's why we're seeing increase in deal flow in on-orbit logistics, on-orbit transportation and the like. So I'm pretty jazzed and excited about that area. Internet of Things from space, and we've got some great examples with Myriota and Fleet here in Australia, I think has the potential to be that next GPS app, I guess, for space.
Yeah.
Just the amount of scalability, and the beauty of space business is you immediately can access a global market. And so I think IoT and looking at, I don't think we've really thought through all the applications, and Alex and Flavia probably have in some extent, but there's a tremendous amount of growth there. Optical and quantum communications, I think, is another area Australia has some strengths and will play out in the future. We all know that the demand for data is only going one direction. How do we assure that data? How do we control that data? How do we flow that data? And so I think there's a lot of growth there. And then looking further out, not next 5-year horizon, the activities on the moon in the next couple of decades, I think are ripe for investment. We're obviously still in an exploration phase, but I think over time that's going to head to an industrialization phase. And how do we, as a nation, bring our strengths to that? And I think it's just incredible. There's 3 commercial lunar missions, at least in Australia, I'm aware of. If you look across space industry, Lunar Ascent, and 7 Sisters. And so we're really at the sort of tail of that area. So Bill, that's just 4. I could probably keep going, but there's 4 areas I'm certainly thinking about.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I loved a couple of things that you said. One thing that you said is everybody's always asking, what's the next application? And I think that in any kind of an emerging industry, the best application is probably one we haven't even thought of yet. We can think of the easy, but what I'm always surprised about is how creative founders and entrepreneurs are. And I'm sure we have a legion of founders out there who are thinking about space and space applications, and there will be things that they will create that will be very beneficial for all of us that we haven't even thought of, you and I aren't even thinking of at the moment. Hey, one other thing I wanted to explore with you quickly was that you said earlier that when we were talking about the public-private partnership, that one thing governments could do is become a customer of or a partner with companies. Is there a program, if I'm an entrepreneur founding something and I want the government as a first customer, or the space agency as a first customer, is that something that's being entertained? And is there a way to understand who's who in the zoo and get in touch, whoever we need to get in touch with? What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think it's pivotal to grow the industry to find opportunities where government can be that anchor customer, because it's proven out to be a successful model in other jurisdictions. In fact, we just saw in the last couple of weeks, DLR, the German government, be a customer for an upstart launch company there called ISA Aerospace, buying a couple of their flights. So it's a model around the world. I certainly hope we can emulate here. To date, the agency has done a lot to support small to medium enterprises with our grant programs. And I think for certain companies, grants are welcome. They're non-dilutive funding. They allow you to invest in low TRL, high risk applications. And we've seen that through Moon to Mars and others. But as you look to the future, how can we as government sort of have that enduring model of investment, right? So if you're an investor looking at the market, where's that long-term mission? Where's that long-term ambition for the nation that's going to build an integrated supply chain? And so I think that's something thinking about. Defense certainly has some programs that fit that. And I think there's more to come there, but that's a focus in my agenda and in my tenure at the agency.
Yeah, that's great to know. And just thought one other thing on that is you had this pretty unique experience in the sense when you were out in Mojave, and for those of you who haven't been out to Mojave, I mean, you fly out, you go out to Mojave, and there's this sort of compound there, and there's a whole bunch of, cool companies, Scaled Composites, Virgin Galactic, Strata Launch, all these rocket engine companies there. And there's one of the things that's interesting is you have a collection and a gravity of companies that sort of run into each other on a daily basis with engineers and things like that, and developers. Is something like Mojave needed here? Is there a need for or a benefit to having a place where there can be a collection of companies who are working in broadly the same areas, but who can learn from and benefit from being close to each other? Is that something viable or contemplated at all?
Yeah, it's a terrific question, Bill. Look, let me start with Mojave is a very unique place. And I was lucky to spend 12 years out in the high desert. It's a place that's built on the shoulders of giants, right? Any major US defense or aerospace program has been flight tested, developed, or built out in the Mojave Desert. And so you've got that incredible backdrop of history inspiring you. What I'd say Mojave brings, and over time, when I first moved to Mojave, it was identified as the Silicon Valley of aerospace companies. But what we've seen over years is that sort of the clustering to people moving to other cities over time. But what Mojave really does is provides an environment for experimentation. It provides an environment that is supportive, that your flight tests might not go as planned. And so it really encourages that risk appetite that's necessary to experiment, learn, repeat tests. One of the neat things with Virgin Galactic and the spaceship company is we had all aspects of designing, building, and testing a human spaceflight system to space all in one location.
Right.
And that was pretty unique. And so I'm a strong believer having your engineers who are building stuff to be with their hardware. But really what Mojave, and I think we can emulate here in Australia, is not necessarily the location clustering, but that environment, that risk appetite, that curiosity that comes together. And now we're seeing areas like Long Beach Airport, for example, in California, have proliferation of space companies. And that draws parallels, obviously, to Lot 14 here and a few of the space hubs elsewhere around Australia. So I don't think we need to replicate Mojave. It'd be very hard because of that heritage, but that creating that environment that allows failure in a safe way is important.
Maybe tell people just a little bit about Lot 14, because I think that's important for people who don't understand that, to understand what it is and what the purpose is.
Yeah, so Lot 14 is a brainchild of the South Australian government here in Adelaide. So we're in the centre of the city on North Terrace. It is the home of the Space Agency headquarters. But what you have here with Stone and Chalk and others is a real hub of talent coming together, inspirational talent, startup companies. So again, that ecosystem where you get that cross-pollination of talent, of resources, and across multiple sectors. We've got space, we've got cyber, IT, machine learning, there's medical ones coming online. Microsoft is now leading in with their Azure space. And so I do feel there's a critical mass forming that is very powerful.
Yeah. Hey, one area that I think that I'm interested in, and we haven't quite figured out how to take advantage of it yet, or formed all of our thoughts, but Australia has something called the Square Kilometre Array. And the SKA is the largest radio telescope in the world, and it's built in conjunction with other countries. But the amount of data that's coming down from that in the analysis of the data means that we have to be developing expertise in our already really strong communications folks, and being able to, if you extrapolate that and you say, listen, whenever we do get these 20,000 LEO satellites up there, that is where there's about 20,000 that are being proposed to be launched now, we will have this broadband connectivity from space, and we'll have lots and lots of data that's coming down, and we'll have to be able to ingest that, decipher it, crunch it, etc. So do you think things like the Square Kilometre Array and our communications expertise that Australia is so good at, is that something that we can be known for, develop an expertise in, so that if someone across the world wants to understand how to process space data and make sense of it, is that something that a founding company here could work on? And is that something that's needed by other global players in the world? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I was fortunate to visit the SK team and ICRA and the Murchison Whitefoot Array teams in WA in July, and really appreciate, you're right, that the quantum of data is enormous.
Yeah. And
so what are the analysis techniques? What are the computing techniques to sort that? So I think by necessity, if we're going to deliver on the vision of SK, we need to sort that. And I think there's going to be a tremendous amount of opportunity. The Australian government is putting over $300 million, I believe, into SKA. And again, how do we funnel most of that into the sector to grow the industry? And obviously through main sequence, we've seen already spin out technologies with Quasar, for example, using the phased array technology, which is, in terms of the number of satellites up there, we can't afford as a globe to have a ground station for every single satellite network that's up there. So I think we're going to see other spin outs out of that. Australia is well known for radio astronomy for decades now, and this just adds to that. So I think it's pretty neat.
Yeah.
So the question I had earlier, I just want to follow up. We're seeing, you've seen the data, and Bryce Tech issued a really interesting report, I think a couple of weeks ago, about the sector, and it was like $7.6 billion that globally went into space tech companies last year, which is just phenomenal. As we think about deal flow, deal quanta in terms of the size of Transact here in Australia, how much do you, but also external investors, how much do we need that sort of Australian unicorn in space? How important is that sort of first signal from your perspective?
Yeah, it is important. I think it's really important for everybody, because it's the old axiom, success begets success, right? We want to see Fleet and Mariota and Gilmore and all the others. We want to see them be successful, because a couple of things happen from that. One is that it shows that you can build something of value that has impact here in Australia. And that's really important, I think, not only for the investment community, but for the country itself and sovereign capability. The other thing that happens is when you have a company that becomes really successful, and this is across, all fields, but you have a whole bunch of people who have grown up with the success of that business. And so they start off as you did, maybe one of the first 10 employees of a company that becomes very successful, and they see what it takes to go from 0 to 1, if you will. And by understanding that, they have their own ideas, and they can spin that idea out. So it's really important that some of these companies that are currently building businesses become really successful, because it will help to spur other entrepreneurs who've grown up inside. There will be a whole bunch of supply chain companies. For instance, with Gilmore, there's a whole bunch of people that supply Gilmore with parts and pieces and things like that. So there's a whole supply chain there. So that's important. It's important that other entrepreneurs from Gilmore eventually have their own ideas, leave Gilmore after Gilmore is successful, of course, and then start their own businesses. So it's really important. And it does then also give back to the investment community that, oh, wow, we can invest in this particular area and make money at it while having impact at the same time. So it's a very important part of the equation.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And we saw that with TSE and Virgin Galactic. And we had a lot of team members after a few years, they get to that stage in their career, they've got the feather and cap, maybe fly in this space. And if I look now at TSE and Virgin, we've had people seed companies like Joby Aviation, who are just doing amazing things in the eVTOL space. Similarly, Boom Aerospace. So you're right, you do get that flywheel effect of talent. And I've seen that firsthand. That's a really good observation, Bill.
Yeah. Yeah, and do you think I know we have a number of the big primes who are in the country already, but is there an opportunity to attract perhaps like a launch company here? I'm not trying to create competition for Gilmore, of course, because we're investors, but if there was, is there an opportunity to attract somebody here? Because we do have, as I said in the beginning, this is a longitudinally lucky country. I mean, we should have my opinion only is we should have launch capability in the north and the south, and that would give us a lot of coverage, and we could actually launch things for other countries as well. But is there the opportunity, or is it in your remit to try and attract other companies here like that, or are we early in the thinking?
Yeah, I think it is. Well, not think it is in our remit to do that, to help grow the domestic sector but also attract international investment. And we work closely with DFAT and Austrade. And actually recently, Minister Tihan held a roundtable in the US with US launch providers talking about, what are the opportunities in Australia. So from a launch perspective, we have geography, we have great locations that can access certain inclinations of orbits. We've got clearly, large unpopulated areas, stable geopolitical climate, a great talent base, and several launch sites around the world are starting to reach capacity. That there's that much activity. So I think both for domestic providers like Gilmore and others, I think there's a great market opportunity to go after. This is why in July we announced we commenced negotiation of the Technology Safeguards Agreement. And once that's in place, it's a treaty level negotiation, which take time, but once that's in place, that will actually be an enabler to foreign launch providers and domestic launch providers, some of their activities here in Australia. So as the agency and government, our job is to create those conditions, create that facilitation that can make business cases close.
Yeah, great. One other thing I'd love to get your thoughts on are that there's a lot of these satellites and other things that are in space have power requirements. And the power requirements oftentimes are, let's have a very low power requirement in a very hostile environment. And that's a very hard thing to do. So do you think that there are opportunities for startups to work in and around the power requirements for all these kinds of machines and robots and communication devices that we're developing? Is there an opportunity there, or is that a solved issue, do you think?
Yeah, I don't think it's a solved issue. I mean, it's tied with the congested piece that I covered earlier.
Yeah.
I think you've seen, companies develop ideas and concepts and put them into practice now for on-orbit servicing. One way to solve the power problems is to bring power to those satellites, so they don't need to carry it on board. There's even in Australia, there continues to be advancements on solar panels. So it's not, Bill, an area I've probably studied. I think there is opportunity because it's a common problem. If that makes sense, that could be addressed.
Yeah. Okay, great. I can see that we're starting to get some questions. So Christian, should we entertain some of the questions at this point in time? Because there's quite a pile of them we're beginning to collect.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've had a number of questions submitted earlier in the sign-up process, and then we've got a few ones here now, and I've been looking through them. There's a few questions that are probably for you, Bill. What suggestions do you have for helping more VCs get interested in space?
Yeah, look, it's up to each individual firm, of course, but I think what has to happen is people have to see, the venture community has to see that there are investment opportunities that can be monetized. And oftentimes this is hard to see. I think anybody who could have invested in SpaceX now probably would have made a positive decision to invest in it if they knew what we know now, if they knew that 10 years ago. So 10 years ago, if you remember, SpaceX, I don't know, Enrico, they had 3 or 4 launches that didn't work at the beginning. And so here you had an industry that was capital intensive, failure prone, started by somebody who didn't understand or who seemingly didn't know much about the entire industry. But if you look at the business today, it's hugely valuable. I think they have the preponderance of launch capability or in and around the globe for the past year. So SpaceX now looks like a great investment if you've invested in it 10 years ago. So part of it is we need to open our brains to the possibilities of the opportunities in space and just understand that they oftentimes might take longer, and be prepared to live with those cycles, so that if we do that, and if we also, as Enrico and I talked about a little bit earlier, have 1 or 2 successes come out of the current cohort, I think that will spur more firms to become interested in the sector.
And maybe to add, I think, so you're right, we need to be able to clearly tell that story of what's involved, but there's also a point now where we also need to investors that have never invested in space really understand how space is changing, right?
Yeah.
The development cycles are shorter than they have been historically. The cost cycles are less.
Correct.
And so there's a storytelling of it. This is capital intensive, this has requirements, but every day the barriers are being reduced. So there's sort of an overlay of those two points coming together right now, I think.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because if you just look at the launch cost per kilo, that's come down pretty darn dramatically over the past 10, 15 years. And as capacity ramps up, launch capacity ramps up, we expect that's going to come down even more. So you will see this reduction in cost in terms of putting things up, and that's definitely part of the equation and understanding the opportunity.
And a question on the back of that: how does TRL, or technology readiness level, align with traditional, i.e., non-space VC funding thinking? Are there any analogies or proxies to draw on?
Yeah, look, TRL is a measure of technology readiness level, of course, and I think the scale is 1 to 10 or 0 to 10. And yes, it's probably safe to say that most venture investors would be more interested maybe when the TRL level is a bit higher, but that's not always the case. And there definitely are analogies. So if you look at the biotechnology industry, or if you look at the semiconductor industry, where there's been billions of dollars put into those 2 particular segments, those are areas where many venture investors have invested lots of money, where there is a company that is trying to develop an unproven therapeutic, for instance, much the same kind of a risk, where there is an opportunity where the TRL might be very low. So there are some definite analogous industries. And for those of us who are interested in the sector, I think we're prepared to go earlier in TRL as long as we can see a path forward that eventually something could be turned into a product and a business model could be figured out. And oftentimes the business model that is figured out, oftentimes there is another piece to it. And the piece is, before launch, is there anything in your business model where you can prove something on the ground? Is there an application on the ground where you can make some money out of that and then put it up into space if it needs launch. Because if you can do that, then the chances of getting funded are better.
Great answer. Thanks, Bill. What are some investment opportunities for edge computing and artificial intelligence for space that you've recently seen, maybe in your deal flow or heard of?
I think that certainly if you had edge computing capacity that was powerful, didn't require a lot of power, and was on a satellite, that could be pretty darned interesting, because if you had AI that can look at images from space, do the computation of what that image is, and then send that signal back down, and that can all be done on satellite extremely cheaply. And again, I'm not the technical expert here to do that, to discuss that, but certainly there should be edge compute and imaging, AI imaging opportunities in satellite Earth observation, where you can identify objects moving, you can identify fire, you can identify flood, you can process and look at water quality and look at changes from day to day. So I certainly see that there's a large opportunity.
And in order to really get the scalability of Internet of Things from space, it's dependent on that at the sensor level, right? Because it's just the amount of bandwidth from tens of thousands, if not millions of sensors eventually are going to drive those requirements as well.
Yeah.
Great. A couple of questions for Enrico. How's the Australian Space Agency helping Aussie startups?
From traditional agencies, and that's in our core of our strategy and core of what we do every day. And it's interesting to even watch some of the more traditional agencies like ESA just in the last couple of weeks talk about its want to really drive its technology into European startups and companies. So it's a model that's been adapted more and more. So I would say we do several things. We have various forms of stimulus fundings through the Space Infrastructure Fund. So this is where we're investing in common infrastructure that small to medium enterprises can leverage, like the mission control, for example, the Discovery Center led by Sabre Astronautics, that's going to be supporting the upcoming Quava mission. And so Quava team haven't had to build their own mission control, as an example. We open doors internationally, and that can be hard for a small company. And what we found very rapidly when the agency was formed was all these doors open. Some nations or civil agencies won't really engage in a meaningful way unless they have a civil agency to connect with. I think we have Moon to Mars has been another example of a program where we can invest in low TRL. So again, these are grant programs. In the long term, I see these advance into procurement programs and others. But I'd say opening doors, providing a regulatory framework to do this. When the agency was formed, we didn't have a regulatory framework that would allow us to launch. We've now rolled that out, and it's a pretty exciting week for Australian space. You may have seen Thai Space announce they're going to launch this week. But I think just being that sort of focal of opportunity, providing connections, the government more broad in the agency has various incubator support programs and venture capital programs. We can certainly send links around for those programs. So there's a lot we do. It all fits under our mandate to grow the sector.
Okay, great. And looking at the Australian workforce development for the space industry, what skill sets are needed to build up entrepreneurship specifically for the space industry?
Yeah, so we recently, alongside SmartSat CRC, they completed a skills gap analysis more broadly. So that your question specifically about entrepreneurialism, but identified for the first time really a taxonomy of the skills we need to grow and develop this sector. And what's important is it's not just about engineers and scientists. There's a lot of sort of vocational training technicians, whether it's wiring harnesses or friction stir welding. There's certainly things that are needed. But in terms of that entrepreneurialism skill set, to the extent we can bring great innovators into the country to train our founders, you want that founder, in my opinion, that founder who knows the technology leading the company, but how do you bring them that support network? Sometimes they get the mentors, and often it's the best case, the mentors from their investors to help develop them. But what are the training or the micro credentials they may need if they haven't done an MBA? Do they understand how to write business plans and such? But I definitely welcome sort of Bill's comments here, because I imagine you think about this when you look at a company you're investing, have they got the right entrepreneurial mindset in the founder, for example?
That's obviously very important. It's people and teams who found companies are exceptionally important, probably one of the most important things we look at. What ambition do the founders have? How big do they think big is? Their ability to do things and get things done. All these things are really important. And do they have a team in order to be able to execute it and execute it? I would point out to you that you oftentimes don't need to be an expert in a particular area in order to be successful. So again, if we just go back to Elon Musk, look, I'm not sure how much he knew about space before he decided to create SpaceX. He probably knew a lot, but here was a guy who had huge ambition, a lot of drive, put a team around him, and had the will to make it work. And this was his life's work, if you will, or at least one section of the life work. The other is Tesla. But having the drive, the ambition, and the will to do something, I think, is most important. And then there's plenty of people in Australia who have lots and lots of skills, engineering skills, software skills, communication skills, and all the soft skills to make something work. The whole collection is important. And I'd have to say it's the vision and the ambition and the execution ability of the founding team that's most important in the evaluation.
Yes, spot on. That's a much better answer, Bill. I think that clarity of purpose with that ambition really, and sticking to that purpose and not getting distracted from that purpose along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And solving it's great to create a company for a company's sake and have a technology that works, but you got to be solving a real problem at some point in time. If you're going to hope to monetize it and convert it into a product that people love and is able to, reduce frustration or solve something that has been unsolvable before. Absolutely.
There's another question here in that context. How can regionally based Australians get involved, and not only the ones that live in the major cities?
Yeah, we have a national mandate to grow the sector. And if I look across our infrastructure and our grant programs, they've really been distributed around the nation. I was impressed, for example, up in Darwin, visiting the team at Speed 3D, who have developed a technology for additive manufacturing of copper alloys for thrust chambers. Just phenomenal. And I had no appreciation that technology was being developed in Darwin. Yes, it's the capital city, but it's one of our regional capital cities. And modern days of working, we've learned it even more through COVID. There's no reason why you can't have this distributed around the country. There's infrastructure. We talked about SKA earlier, that's east of Geraldton. And so there's opportunities to contribute to that. I'm from Perth originally, and was actually, you tend to think of Adelaide, which has got obviously a huge ecosystem developing, and New South Wales and Queensland and others. But I was able to fill a room on a Friday afternoon. I think it was 19 startup companies in Perth that were either already working in space or looking to get into space. And it's a real national effort. I think ultimately we'll have centers around a launch and manufacturing that sort of conglomerate. But I think there's a lot of regional opportunities, and more so on the outcomes. I said before, what do we want to be known for? From my perspective, we want to be known for a nation that's very intelligent around the use of space data to solve some of our greatest challenges. And some of our greatest challenges are in the regions. And I cited the Space Cows initiative with Microsoft and CSIRO earlier, for example. So I think there's an amazing sort of breadth of opportunities to use space to improve regional life, obviously communications and others.
And just adding to that, for us, geography doesn't matter. I don't think geography restricts how intelligent or what your drive is. And there's many examples of great companies being started in really small towns or people from small towns. It's interesting to me. I read, being a little bit of a history buff around the entire space sector, I read a book about the Mercury astronauts to begin with some time ago. And I remember that I think the entire selection of the class, all of the people who were selected, they seem to all come from little small dinky town. I don't know what that says, but for us, it doesn't matter whether you come from Sydney or some really small town out west. If you have the drive and ambition, there's no geographic restrictions, as long as you can at least put a team together where that can support what you're trying to do. So I would encourage everybody who's got a great idea to come talk to Enrico or myself.
That's a great segue into the next question. What are the basic things that you look for in a space startup in Australia that would come to you? Again,
they're pretty much the same that we would look for in any sector, but it's a great founding team, a problem to be solved, a solution or a proposed solution that we think is best in class globally, a business model or a way to monetize that and make money out of it, because eventually the company has to make dollars or it's out of business. And opportunity to make an impact. And for us, what we like to also see is we'd like to see some sort of a connection with a research group, either a university or CSIRO or one of the public research agencies where that agency might be able to help kickstart or help to improve the product set. Team, market opportunity, solution, problem in the market, and being able to solve all of those. Having all that in a bundle is what we look at. And it doesn't have to be all complete, of course, but at least there has to be a vision, and it has to be something that we can see can turn into something valuable over time.
And would you favor a company that wants to stay in Australia and raise money from Australian investors, or one that wants to go globally and also raise from overseas venture capital funds?
I think our bias is we like to think that we invest in companies that provide global solutions. So if you look at all the companies that we're invested in now, while they are looking to solve, they're local, but obviously they can provide solutions for customers globally. So we're looking at customers that can provide global solutions. And I would say that if you look at how most venture investments are done, that while us or another fund similar to us might do the initial investment, over time, as the company becomes successful, you have investors not only locally, but globally come to invest in the business. So over time, you could expect that there will be a number of global investors in the more successful companies as they grow.
All right, great. Looks like we're almost out of time. I would like to ask each of you to just give us a 1-minute final statement, and then we'll close up.
I can hop in. Firstly, thank you to Christian and Michelle and the team for organizing this, and Bill. It was great to spend the last hour together. I just say, if there's investors thinking about investing in Australian space, now is the time. Momentum is at an all-time high. You just need to look at the cadence of the news coming out of the sector, approaching our first launch. You've got some of these startups getting into Y Combinator. We've got amazing talent in the nation. I think we've got great priorities for our space program. You've got a government and an agency that is focused on growth of the sector. I'm certainly excited about what the future holds.
Yeah, I would say that I would say the same thing. I think, again, thanks to the organizers for doing this, Michelle and Christian, and it's wonderful that the audience is here. So thank you as well. But I think it's a real coup that Enrico, you're in the seat here, because you've got some fantastic experience that is needed, and I'm sure you do a great job. But look, we got a space agency, we got somebody in the seat who really understands this business. We got several venture firms who are looking for opportunities. We've got really smart people, and we've got the federal government and state governments who are supporting the sector. So, and there's a huge opportunity. So I would encourage everybody to look hard, play hard, think hard, and invest well. And we're open for business.